My name is Adana Protonentis. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be your facilitator tonight. I'm the co-owner of Kindred Leaders, which is an equity, inclusion, and belonging consulting and strategy practice. I'm a member of the faculty in Seattle University's Master of Public Administration program, former chair of the Washington Developmental Disabilities Council, proud mama of two marvelous, very spicy teenagers, both with disabilities. Um, and more than anything, a member of our community who really wants safe and supportive schools for my babies and for your babies and for the babies that I'm never even going to get to meet. I'm so glad that you're here. As we did for our May 12th Kids Do Well If They Can webinar, we will be recording this meeting to share with you all and to share with folks who weren't able to join us tonight. As you're entering tonight, I want to invite you to take a moment, maybe take a nice deep breath. If it feels good, close your eyes and picture a person who inspires you to be part of this conversation. Maybe it's one of your students, maybe it's your child or grandchild or niece or nephew or nibbling. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's yourself. And so with that picture in mind, I want to invite you to share two things in the chat. To please share your school or community connection and to share a hope that you're bringing with you for tonight's conversation. Throughout our conversation together, feel free to use the chat for reflections, for connection, for questions. We're going to be trying to gather all of the questions, intentions, and ideas that we want to carry forward from tonight and synthesize to help us move forward and continue this incredible momentum. We will have time in breakout rooms and we'll be using a Padlet to organize all of these thoughts. And then in the large group, of course, we've got a lot to cover in a short period of time, and we really appreciate your grace and support as we try to do that. For educators, please remember that clock hours are awarded for your attendance this evening. The name or email address that you signed in with will be used to mark your attendance, and we'll drop the PD enroller link in the chat. We'll also send a follow-up email. And before we go any further, it feels important to pause and to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Puget Sound Coast Salish peoples. We honor their enduring stewardship of this land and recognize that respect must be reflected in our actions and commitments to justice in our schools and communities. We're committed to following their leadership. We acknowledge the enslaved people, primarily of African descent, whose labor built this nation and many of the systems that we work within today. And as we gather to think about how schools can better see and support young people, we hold this history close, front of mind, and recognize the ongoing work of honoring human dignity in education. The response to the May 12th webinar was much bigger than we anticipated. We had 369 participants. We had 123 survey responses so far. Educators, families, student support staff all attended or watched the webinar another way, and they really connected deeply with the ideas behind collaborative and proactive solutions. But the overwhelming message was, okay, how do we actually do this? How do we move from what if to what next? And tonight is about that question. And we find ourselves in this unique position of addressing really two audiences whose needs and interests overlap. We've got folks who want to learn more about what CPS looks and feels like in classrooms. They want case studies and examples. They want tactics. They want strategy. They need information to translate the theory into daily practice that will fit into their unique context. And then we've got folks who are ready to act and are asking how to access and advocate for training, including pilot sites, applied training, ongoing coaching to support a CPS implementation at the classroom level, at the school level, at the district level. We're going to do our best to really tend to all of these types of interest with you tonight. So that's enough out of me, plenty of words. We are going to begin with a case study so that we can get to hear from our guest of honor, Dr. Ross Greene. So we're going to start with a practical example of CPS in action, since so many folks responded and asked for exactly that. So you see on your screen a pretty typical scenario that plays out in classrooms every day in Seattle Public Schools. This scenario was written by one of our team members who works in several different Seattle schools, supporting students with complex academic and behavioral needs. The example is a composite of different students, but we think it's pretty representative of a common classroom situation. So we've got a fourth grade student who is repeatedly refusing writing tasks. They put their head down, they swear sometimes when they're pushed, sometimes they leave the classroom. And staff disagree about whether expectations should be reduced, whether they should be enforced more consistently, or addressed behaviorally. This student is bright and capable, especially during preferred activities. So, Dr. Greene, could you walk us through how a CPS approach changes the way that adults understand and respond to this situation? And then part two, how might how might adult interpretation differ depending on identity factors with this student, their gender, their race, whether they're neurodivergent, etc.
First of all, hello, everybody. Glad to be with you again. Um, so let's begin with um, many of the things that are being said about Weston. The fact that Weston escalates when pushed um, sounds pretty typical of the kids I work with, anyways. Leaving class is a frustration response. Escalating is a frustration or distress response. Good to know that Weston is successful at things that are preferred. And here's really important point number one. Somebody is missing if the only people who are thinking about how to respond are the adults. In the CPS model, Weston is integral, indispensable. In the CPS model, we really can't move forward until we hear from Weston. I can't say how often I hear that, and this is my own experience as well, that we adults um, underestimate what kids bring to the problem-solving process, both in terms of critical, helping us understand what's really making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation, and helping us come up with solutions that are actually going to work.
Okay.
At the more macular level, at the more micro level, avoids writing tasks isn't specific enough. So we're going to begin with the assessment of skills and unsolved problems to write very specific micro unsolved problems about these specific writing tasks Weston is having difficulty getting started on or completing. We're going to arrange a time to proactively discuss one of them with Weston. It's possible that solving one will solve many, but we won't know that until we solve one. And then we're going to involve Weston in the process of helping us figure out what's making it hard for Weston to complete a particular writing assignment and come up with solutions so that Weston doesn't have difficulty completing writing assignments of whatever that specific unsolved problem was anymore. Here's what else we're hoping. We're hoping that adults who are working with Weston are self-aware enough to be aware of whether they are making any assumptions about Weston based on Weston's gender, race, disability, neurotype. Uh, in this model, while we are aware of the possibilities, we are also largely checking them at the door because the number one source of information on what's making it hard for Weston to meet a particular expectation is Weston. One of the things the CPS model brings to the table is what we call assumption-free living.
Mm.
Our assumptions are usually Wrong. So we don't want to make assumptions based on gender, race, disability, neurotype, age, IQ. Uh, we don't want to be making assumptions based on anything. So we are hoping that adults are self-aware enough to nip those in the bud, catch them when they pop up, check their assumptions at the door, and rely on Weston to let us know what's hard.
Hmm. I really appreciate that. And it makes me wonder, sometimes something that I see in real life with adults, whether they are family or educators or professionals who are interacting with kids, even my kids, is that they might ask what's hard. They might ask my children what's difficult or what's getting in your way of being able to do this thing. And then we have adults who don't believe the answer. And so the exercise of asking the question becomes meaningless. The kid says, "This is hard because my hand gets tired when I hold the pencil for too long." And the adult says, "It's not that hard." I'm curious if you encounter this struggle with belief as well, and how you respond to it.
We certainly encounter it because, like it or not, we all had biases
Hmm?
uploaded, um, sometimes without our knowledge. We have biases. I don't know anybody who's bias free, me included. The trick is not to be bias free. I don't know if that's achievable because they're in there, right? The trick is to recognize them, nip them in the bud, and rely on the kid. But as we are gathering information from Weston or any other student about what's making it hard for them to meet an expectation, um, it's a process. It's not often not a super quick one. We're not done gathering information from Weston until Weston has nothing left to give us. So we are trying to be exhaustive.
Mhm.
And the way we're exhaustive is by what we call drilling for information, using drilling strategies. And there are 8 of them, but that can be a little overwhelming. So newbies usually start with just 3. But
Mhm.
we're gathering information from Weston. And what we're teaching adults is even if you have doubts about what a kid says, keep drilling. It'll all come out in the wash, right? Even if you're thinking that cannot possibly be true, keep drilling. It'll all come out in the wash.
Mhm.
It's an interesting, another bias that we have that is not necessarily centered on characteristics of the kid is we often think that kids are going to try to pull the wool over our eyes,
I
uh,
see that a lot.
say what we want to hear. Here's the interesting thing in this model, because you're not talking with the Westons of the world about their behavior, there's nothing for them to pull the wool over your eyes about.
Mhm.
They can't say what you want to hear because you're not pulling for anything. For me, this is one of the beauties of this model. Um, I don't want to hear anything. I'm pulling for nothing. I want to hear what you have to tell me. Pure, unadulterated information. I was interviewing somebody this afternoon who's in Georgia, who's been doing the model for a while. He said his first hour learning about this model was his hardest because he came in a consequence guy, and within an hour, he was no longer. And we were asking him what that process was like for him.
Mhm.
And as part of his answer, he was telling us that there are times when he's gathering information from kids that he's actually crying, not only because he's now understanding a kid better,
Mhm.
he's crying because of how wrong he is
Mm.
often. And it's really quite jarring when we come in with our biases or with our preconceived notions or thinking we already know. And part of this is our training. I might have said this last time. Those of us who were trained to know. So this is a departure from our training for many people, right? They're wondering, well, if I not the person who's supposed to know. What am I doing? You are gathering information from the kid so that you can find out. That's the artistry. That is
Mhm.
a new skill for many adults. In the case of this one person, it sometimes causes him to cry because of what he's now learning. He was telling the story about a student who was leaving the classroom whenever she was being asked to read and had been doing so for 2 years. And no one had ever asked her what was making it hard for her to read. And what they found out was that her reading glasses had broken about 2 years ago.
Oh,
Without that information, they could not know what to do next, right?
right.
But he said that was transformative because all of a sudden everybody wanted to buy her new glasses. Anyways, our biases and our assumptions get in the way. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're trained, sometimes they're uploaded without our permission, sometimes they've been in there for a very long time. I can't recommend assumption-free living enough.
I'm with you. In my line of work, we do a lot of bias mitigation work. For sure. And we often tell folks if you have a brain, you have a bias. Bias just means that you're really good at pattern recognition. That's all it is. And sometimes it's a helpful bias. Like I have a bias against wasps because they're mean and they will hurt me. That is a helpful bias that protects me. We might also have unhelpful biases that, as you said, were uploaded without our permission, and that can really get in our way of showing up for kids the way that they need us to.
Right,
I'd love to transition to some of the questions that we received in the
right.
survey that also align with the scenario and can help us think about it a little bit more broadly. And you just spoke about an educator who's about a year into this work, and some of the things that he's starting to notice. And that feels like a great segue into this first question, which is when educators begin using CPS effectively, what are some of the changes that they usually notice first, whether that's in the students, in themselves, or in the classroom?
Well, I would like to say that there are three parts to CPS: the
Hmm.
lenses, the assessment tool, the assessment of skills and unsolved problems, and the practice of solving problems collaboratively and proactively.
Hmm.
Um, Lots of things change when people start to recognize that a kid's concerning behavior is a frustration or distress response. Lots of things start to change when people recognize that there are expectations kids are having difficulty meeting, or
Hmm.
what we call unsolved problems that are behind those distress or frustration responses.
Hmm.
That's an awakening just there,
Yeah.
right? Lots of people, when they are either first doing the ASIP or just getting the lenses on, it is a revelation, and I don't use that word lightly, that kids' maladaptive frustration responses are due to skills rather than poor motivation. I was in an ASIP meeting recently where within the first 15 minutes of the ASIP meeting, a third grade teacher said, "This is changing everything about how I've been viewing this student, how I want to treat this student."
Hmm.
That's lenses. When
Hmm.
we're identifying unsolved problems and moving people away from the behaviors that are being caused by those problems, number one, another revelation. No wonder our behavior management efforts haven't worked. We've been focused on the wrong thing. Consequences don't solve any problems. No wonder we aren't getting any problems solved. Oh, so this list is what we're working on now. This list of unsolved problems. That's very different than target behaviors.
Hmm.
Now I see the mountain that lies before me. And now, if I'm listening, I know that I'm not going to have to solve them all. I only have to solve 8, 10, 12 of them because some are going to solve by solving others.
Hmm.
And then, as I was recounting from the conversation this afternoon, there's nothing like listening to kids. I was hearing that from a colleague in New Zealand later
Hmm.
in the day today, who was saying how much she's learning about her students by finally listening to them. Those are the types of things that change.
That's pretty exciting.
It is as exciting as it gets.
Yes. In my 16 years as a parent, I can tell you kids have a lot to tell you if you can make it safe for them to share what's on their mind and what's on their heart.
I always say to people, the number one complaint I get from adults is that kids won't talk to them. And the number one complaint I get from kids is that the adults aren't listening.
Mm.
And those two tend to go together.
Yeah. Um, all right. Well, along the lines of kids feeling unlistened to and adults maybe asking the wrong questions or not asking the questions, that makes me think about adult capacity. And we did definitely hear from folks in our survey who had questions about, like, what if I'm in a context where I have a really large class size, a lot of competing demands, I've got multiple students needing support. How do I make this manageable in that kind of situation?
That is a school-wide project. That is not a single teacher project.
Hmm.
While a single teacher could try to manage that in a variety of different ways, what we're looking for here is time,
Hmm.
right? And it has to be something we are committed to. It has to be something we are intentional about because we do not want to be solving problems in the heat of the moment. We want to be solving problems proactively. That
Hmm.
is huge. So we're going to have to be intentional about creating the time because every classroom teacher or administrator who's joining in knows that the school day was not designed around giving classroom teachers time to solve problems with their students. So we got some changes to make, and the changes are not going to be super dramatic. But what we're looking to do within each building, and it looks different in every building, although coverage tends to be a big part of the creating time picture in
Hmm.
most buildings. Exactly what that looks like varies depending on buildings.
Hmm.
We need to give classroom teachers time to solve problems with their students. Bottom line, right?
Yeah.
That saves time. We're spending a lot of time dealing with concerning behavior. We're spending a lot of time using practices that aren't working. If this is a classroom that has more than one adult in it, perhaps there's a paraprofessional, perhaps there's an ed tech. One person can cover the classroom while the other does the problem-solving process with a student. What I always say about this is I get the time concern. It's the first thing educators talk about, and understandably so.
Hmm.
The key here is commitment, not time. What we
Hmm.
find is that when schools commit to solving problems collaboratively and proactively with their students, they figure out the time part.
Hmm.
Once again, coverage is a big part of it, but this is more about commitment and intentionality.
I agree. I can't stop thinking about, I've a lot of school communities are working with restorative justice models, which are really focused on repairing a relationship when there's been a rupture of some kind. And I think there's a great deal of value in that. And another model that I find valuable to extend the work of restorative justice, and it feels like aligns with CPS, is transformative justice. And transformative justice says when there's a rupture of some kind, we ask ourselves this question about what was it about business as usual that created conditions where this behavior was possible in the first place? And when we answer that question, we can make changes and we can shift the operating conditions. It feels like this is the work of shifting our operating conditions to really tend to unsolved problems. Um, yeah, that's just
It is hard for me to imagine, given what's walking in the door of classrooms these days,
mhm,
not having dedicated time to solve problems with students. It is unimaginable that that is the reality for so many classroom teachers. That is something we badly need to do something about.
mhm.
By not doing something about it, there's a lot of students we're not helping. I've always said that what's best for students is what's best for their teachers. If we're not helping students, we're not helping their teachers either.
Absolutely. Another question for you, based on folks responses to our survey was there was some confusion around the difference between an unsolved problem and a behavior. I also saw versions of a question around what does CPS look like after serious incidents, especially when classmates or staff have been hurt or scared. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to like differentiating this distinction between an unsolved problem and a behavior. I think I know the answer, but I'd rather hear from you.
An unsolved problem is any expectation that a student is having difficulty meeting.
Hmm.
The example that usually rolls off my tongue is difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. That's not only a great unsolved problem, it's a very well-worded unsolved problem. Difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Um, that's an expectation a student is having difficulty meeting.
Hmm.
Their concerning behavior that comes after they're having difficulty or while they're having difficulty,
Hmm.
or even before they have difficulty completing the double digit division problems on the worksheet in math, because as I always say, this is not the first time they've
Hmm.
had difficulty meeting that expectation. It's probably the 37th time. So just when we put the assignment in front of them,
Hmm.
they may exhibit a concerning behavior. So the concerning behavior could be something like tipping the desk over, running out of the classroom, calling the teacher a name, throwing their pencil across the room. Those are concerning behaviors. But the unsolved problem that set those behaviors in motion is difficulty completing the double digit division problems on the worksheet in math.
Hmm.
Unsolved problems are the unmet expectation. The concerning behavior is the frustration or distress response.
Hmm.
I can't help but point out what a lot of folks have been focused on for a very long time is the frustration response and trying to modify it through adult imposed consequences. And there is absolutely nothing about doing that that is ever going to solve difficulty completing the double digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Remind me of the second part of your question, because I definitely want to answer it.
Yeah, it's a question about kind of the after, right? Like there folks are
Mhm.
still asking this question of like, right, but after we see serious incidents with behavior that causes a great deal of distress, maybe even causes people to feel hurt or scared, um, is there an application for CPS in that kind of context, or is it too late to use it?
Well, um, you could do something restorative,
Hmm.
but until that problem gets solved, it's going to happen again.
Right.
The best thing we can do about scary incidents, which for me mostly means what I called last time unlucky frustration responses.
Hmm.
And last time we also learned that I don't really differentiate between lucky and unlucky frustration responses because they all say the same thing to me. There's an expectation a student is having difficulty meeting, right?
Hmm.
So the fact that it is unlucky doesn't really change anything. I can't say this often enough, so I'm going to repeat myself. Until that problem gets solved, whether the frustration response is lucky or unlucky, it's going to happen again.
Hmm.
Best favor we can do those who may have been traumatized or scared or had their learning disrupted by that big frustration response is solve the problem that caused it.
Hmm.
Everything else we might do, um, nice, but if it doesn't solve the problem that caused it in the first place, the problem is still unsolved. All we've done is something else. We have got to solve the problem. That's the bottom line.
Hmm. I'm curious, because a lot of this is conditions work, and that's conditions work is, to your point, not something that an individual teacher can do effectively for very long. They can think about their classroom conditions up to a point, but there's a lot that's outside of their control, and so you need the collaboration and commitment of an entire school community with you. Um, where do you see schools most commonly getting stuck in implementation? And what kind of patterns do you notice in the schools that most successfully implement CPS versus those that stay stuck in the awareness stage and struggle with the implementation and application part?
Um, the main thing that comes to mind is school leaders.
Hmm.
This is not, I always hope that it will continue organically, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
Hmm.
But if we have a school leader, and that doesn't necessarily mean the person at the top, although that helps.
Hmm.
If we have a school leader who is helping people keep their eye on the ball, setting goals, setting benchmarks, how do we know we're getting there? How do we know we're making progress? What do we need to do next? Uh,
Hmm.
what are we missing? Who's still slipping through the cracks? Who's still trying to send me discipline referrals instead of solving problems with their students?
Hmm.
I read a study that said about 75% of teachers would never think of sending a kid to the office,
Hmm.
which I found fascinating
Hmm.
because it says that the majority of teachers really don't see the point. All right. If they don't see the point, then let's make it possible for them to have the knowledge to deal with it effectively and well in their classrooms.
Hmm.
Let's create mechanisms for giving them time to do that because they don't even see the point in sending a kid to the office. And what are we going to do with the 25% who still think that's a good idea?
Hmm.
As if the office is in a position to solve any problems for them. Offices can't do that. Offices don't know enough about the problem to do anything about it. So the biggest hurdle tends to be, people get very excited about the lenses of the model.
Hmm.
People get very excited about using the assessment of skills in unsolved problems. If this doesn't get embedded into school structures and practices, we're in trouble
Hmm.
because there are a lot of structures and practices in schools that are still pointing us toward doing something else. What structures depends on the leader of the building, it depends on the school itself. Do we need to blow everything up? Usually not. Can we do CPS within our existing structures? Sure, as long as your existing structures don't point people to focus on behavior and instead point people to focus on unsolved problems. You can write a beautiful functional behavior assessment if you're mandated to around unsolved problems instead of frustration responses. You can write a beautiful behavior intervention plan around unsolved problems rather than around kids' frustration responses. But if a lot of those things stay the same and we stay focused on behavior, then we are like two ships passing in the night. What we're teaching people to do is not what's embedded in our structures and our paperwork and our practices. So we have to start taking a very good look at that right from the get-go.
Hmm. I keep thinking about how the United States is a very punitive culture. We say accountability when we really mean punishment a good chunk of the time.
Mm,
And it seems like we forget that the Latin root of the word discipline actually means to teach. It doesn't mean to punish.
right,
And there's this, I wonder if that's an obstacle that gets in the way with adoption and like wholehearted commitment is this deep-seated perspective that when behavior happens that we would rather not see, it should be punished rather than ask those questions like, what was it about business as usual? What was it that was getting in this child's way? What was the unsolved problem?
right. One of the things this gentleman from Georgia said this afternoon, who's been doing the model for a little while, is um, one of the things he asks staff who are struggling to incorporate the model into their thinking and their practices. And by the way, I expect that, right?
Mhm.
If you've been thinking a certain way and doing things a certain way for a long time, or even if it hasn't been a long time, but that's been your training, this is a big shift, right? So I expect that this will be a big shift.
Mhm.
I've seen people who were most vehemently opposed to this model in the beginning become among its most ardent advocates in the end. So somebody's initial response to this model for me is neither here nor there. It just tells me what work still needs to be done.
Hmm.
But what he's often asking staff who are struggling is, how is what we're doing now working? And he works in special education settings,
Hmm.
schools. These are kids who've had a lot of something that isn't working for a very long time.
Yeah.
That's why they're in his building, right? How is that working for this kid? How is that working for us staff? And
Hmm.
what is the harm in thinking of different ways of doing things?
I love it. That's a great question. All right, folks, we want to create some space for you to get to connect with each other because the way that we will most likely be able to make progress is through community collaboration and connection and relationship building. There is a ton of wisdom in this Zoom room, and I'm really excited to see what happens when you all get to connect in breakout rooms and share that wisdom with each other. So we want to frame what happens next in the following way. There's this really brilliant facilitator and master of gathering named Priya Parker. And she talks a lot about the concept of the magical question. And a magical question is a question that not only you want to learn the answer to, but everyone else in the group is also interested in the answer to. Magical questions invite us to think expansively about a question we can ask that's going to create benefit for everyone. And so we want to invite you to work together to come up with your magical questions that are going to create benefit for all of us who have skin in this game. So tonight isn't really about arriving at perfect agreement. You know, it's not going to get tied up with a neat and tidy bow. I'm so sorry. But as a mentor of mine often says, if you think there's an easy answer, then you haven't been deep enough in the work. We really want to do the work of surfacing the conversations that we really need to have together. So we're going to have 15 minutes in breakout rooms. And as we move into the breakout room, keep in mind that idea of the magical question. Keep in mind this facilitation principle from Adrienne Marie Brown, who says that there is a conversation that only this group of people can have at this moment, and our job is to find it. So in your breakout room, please think about the conversation that is unique to this group of educators, family, advocates, support staff, and leaders. You'll have a facilitator in the room with you who will take notes, capture major themes, and collect your questions. You'll spend 15 minutes in the breakout room, and then you'll come back and we'll do a larger group debrief and Q&A. All right. I think we've got most folks back from the breakout rooms. Those are just never long enough. I hope you had really fruitful, juicy conversations. And I'm just going to go breakout room by breakout room and ask for a recap of kind of major themes and 1 to 2 questions that you're hoping we'll get to answer. So hopefully you remember your breakout room number, and I'll just ask the facilitators to share out. Could we have the facilitator from room 1 give us a recap of your conversation? What were the major themes that came up?
Yeah, that happened very quick, that whole conversation. I think the big piece was the buy-in from admin, was kind of a big topic,
Mhm.
as well as from the school community. How do we plug this and how do we get some momentum going? There was conversation around PBIS too, and how this meshes or doesn't, and how do we um, do both or not, or yeah.
Mhm. Awesome. I imagine we'll hear that theme come up again. Let's see if I'm right. How about group 2?
So this is Yana. So we didn't have that much time. So I'm going to just read what we got.
Great.
How do we deal with factors that impact students outside of school? For example, a student that has a parent with a mental health need at home, which impacts how they support the student. How can the school district, this one I'm going to go give away, came from a school board director, and I love that question. How can the district support adoption of this framework? Then the next one was more on the systemic. Could MTSS collaborate to implement this framework, or could the MTSS implement this framework. And then two more, how to create time in the school schedule, maybe like a master schedule or anything else, to for staff to have space and time
Mhm.
to help students solve problems. Like, are there any other examples how to implement this framework? And then the last one is, can the solving of problem with a student happen later in the day, or not in the moment? Can we like put a pin in it to not solve it in that particular time? That's
Mhm.
what we
All
got to.
right. Great list. Thank you. Okay, group three. What were your big themes that you discussed?
Hi, I'm Katie, and our group three, we had a lot of questions and discussion. There was a mention of time, and in particular, time for addressing the unsolved problems.
Mhm.
There was a highlight more of a concern than a question, but that we need more people to think that it matters. So at the district and even the state level, to get the support to get the work done, we need to make sure that others in power care about it, and even those on the ground. So
Mhm.
and then there was a mention of academic benchmarks and requirements and Washington state standards. And so the teachers are being, pressured and administrators to meet these standards. And if we're supporting the kids, that may take some relaxing or temporary, and a recognition that we're going to meet
Mhm.
kids where they're at. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. Group four.
Okay. Time obviously came up, and this sort of along dovetailing with time, this idea of teachers just even starting to hear about this are like, I don't have like that. There's a bit of a shutdown. So I think maybe some of the question would be, how do we really support teachers to feel safe enough to learn more about this?
Mhm.
Um, because once they kind of could see this isn't just on you, this is like a systemic a thing that would likely bring more people in who are
Mhm.
worried that this is actually going to make their lives harder.
Mhm.
um, we also had let's see, um, how so like I think there was a little bit of a tension around like there's already been a lot of training, there's already a lot of tools out there, like how like can, and this is kind of a question for the framework too, can other behavioral intervention approaches like go along with this? Does this framework mean you're only doing this, or does this framework
Mhm.
mean we're kind of doing what works for each student?
Yeah.
And we need to be open to new learning, new things, not doing the same things over and over. And a technical question was, do we need district buy-in, or can schools do this one-on-one? What is the district buy-in right now? And then also someone from the North Shore district pointed out that at their school, for anything, at their district, for anything new to come in, has to go through bargaining and the teachers union first. So a logistical question would be, how do we include the teachers union in this conversation and get their
Great.
buy-in and interest?
Yeah. Awesome. That was a great recap. Thank you. And I'm noticing some themes emerging even among this kind of curated version so far of the themes that came out of each individual breakout room, which I think it's really helpful to see where the energy is. Group number five, could you share with us highlights from your conversation?
For sure. I've also been feverishly typing in the Padlet, so trying to
Thank
capture
you.
as much as I can. So we talked about how do schools really take on this work and how to support teachers when they are taking on the work. Another one is how to make it work. Time was a big issue. Um, how to make people who may be resistant because of various reasons. It could be cultural reasons, it could be their upbringing. It's just something that's not familiar to them or doesn't feel logical, I would say. Um,
Mhm.
how do we start to convince those folks that it's something that is worth their time and energy? And how do this one came up a few times. How do we include this in the IEP process?
Mm, That is really
And one more, which was to get a better understanding of implementation given limited staff availability for training and things like that, and whether or not CPS is streamlinable, so we can make this happen faster and easier, make it faster and easier for folks to adopt.
okay. All right. I think we have two more groups, right? There were a total of 7. So group number 6.
This is Pam. I too felt constrained by the time, but we had, I thought, some really, really good questions and comments. So to try to summarize, there were a few questions around implementation, right? Like this feeling like there's need for more clarity around what the implementation plan would be. What does that look like? And some discussion around a lot of these types of models need multiple years. And so what does all of that look like and how do we get there? Another theme was insufficient support. So like we heard from some of these other groups, conversations around the reliance being on individual staff or PTAs to help support getting this type of training in schools and really needing more buy-in from the district or administrative level. And with that, concerns with sustainability, right? So losing momentum over time. How do we maintain that? And then finally, some equity concerns. So really relying on, again, individuals or school-based advocates is kind of creates that inequity that not all schools are getting consistent support. I think that's it.
Super helpful. Thank you. All right, group 7, bring us home. What do you got?
Okay, so question was how to address CPS with students with different communication needs, whether it be due to age or communication differences. There is also a little bit of tension on how to address competing mindsets within school teams, lack of alignment among different staff members, and questions about building trust with students with a long history on consequent-based interventions. Question about how to apply CPS for school refusal, because the school refusal within of itself could be due to the conditions currently present within the school. And then there was an offering of an idea of declarative statements for students with communication challenges. So I wanted to share that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, so I heard a lot in just that quick little debrief. I heard a lot of themes around buy-in, whether that's in terms of hierarchy and getting folks who have decision-making power to buy into this notion, and also even among peers navigating competing mindsets and community members. I heard a lot about time, finding the time, making the time, imagining what school looks like so that there's enough spaciousness to solve these kinds of problems. I heard a lot about in kind of adapting or just learning a desire to learn more about how to like tactically, practically practice CPS with this very diverse school community that we've got, whether that's diversity in terms of how people communicate, diversity in terms of other types of factors that shape a person's experience. I heard a lot about trust building, I think, and that both explicitly trust building in terms of kids who've experienced a lot of like behavior-based kind of consequence sort of intervention, but also trust building throughout the community with folks who are like, we've been asked to learn a lot. We've been asked to try a bunch of things. They've been of varying degrees of success. How do we know that this is going to be the one? And then some questions around how does this fit with some of the systems and structures that are already in place, like MTSS and PBIS and all the other acronyms that are out there. Fantastic questions. So Dr. Greene, I'm going to invite you to answer all of them in 10 minutes.
Here's what I'll say though, we can't. But the fact that the questions are being asked tells me that people are trying to envision um, what it would be like if they were able to move in this direction and what some of the hurdles are going to be. And that's actually fantastic. What I'm not hearing is a whole lot of philosophical disagreement.
Mhm.
I'm not hearing that people think it's a bad idea to be solving problems with our students. I'm not hearing people say, no, 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 no. The consequences are non-negotiable. We need to keep suspending kids who are struggling. We need to keep giving them detentions. We need to keep restraining and secluding them. So there's things I'm not hearing that are actually very positive signs. The things I am hearing are, by the way, the things that we need to think about as we're starting to think about implementation. Let me, and Adana, I'm going to ask you to fill in with questions that I'm not remembering. I tried to write as quickly as I could.
Mhm.
Um, does this fit within a tiered system of support,
Mhm.
whether it's MTSS or PBIS, both involving tiers? Um, yeah, why not? My favorite answer to the question at what tier is this occurring is any tier, every tier. Doesn't matter what the tier. Um, this is not a tier-based intervention. It is something we are engaging students in when we notice that they're having difficulty meeting an expectation. Um, when does CPS kick in? That's when CPS kicks in, when you notice that a student is struggling.
Mhm.
Most students, um, I wish it wasn't this way, but a lot of the students who CPS is being applied to in schools are already working on IEPs, already at tier 2 or 3.
Mhm.
What does that tell me? This is not a criticism. It's telling me that whatever we've done so far didn't get the job done. What was missing? What was missing was identifying that students' skills and unsolved problems. So one thing that was missing was the ASIP.
Mhm.
Another thing that was missing is that we were focused on their behaviors instead of the problems that were causing them.
Mhm.
Another thing that's often missing is that problems are not being solved proactively, they're being solved reactively.
Mhm.
Another thing that's missing is that the person who is solving the problem is the adult, not in concert with the kid.
Mhm.
So there are many things about current practices that are contrary to CPS. In the case of PBIS, it is focused primarily on behavior
Yep.
and checking in and checking out about it and teaching and reteaching it. That's a departure. Do you have to blow it up to do CPS? No. But what we often find is that once people start doing CPS, they start doing a whole lot less of what they were doing before.
Mhm.
So can you do this within tiers? Sure. Um, how important do the tiers remain once you start doing this, given that you are solving problems at every tier? We'll find out.
Mhm.
Another question I remember is the time question.
Mhm.
And what you're bumping into here is my slight allergy from experience telling schools what to do. Every school's different. Every school handles the time issue differently. It's great for me to say that ultimately a school is going to save time, but that doesn't tell them what to do to start implementing the model in the first place with the time constraints that are in place.
Mhm.
Every school has to solve that problem. That is an unsolved problem for the school to solve. This is us coming together. This is not Ross Greene or Lives in the Balance or anybody else saying, do this. Saying do this to any school makes no sense. Every school is different. So I can just give people some general parameters around what
Mhm.
I've seen schools do. And the biggest part of that is coverage,
Mhm.
um, the recognition. You know what? Nobody was doing MTSS 30 years ago.
Mhm.
So the fact that this is new does not necessarily mean that we can't do it, especially if this is the direction we want to move in.
Mhm.
We teach reading in completely different ways now than we did 30 years ago. So new is not a new thing
Mhm.
in education. What I find is that if when school staff come together around this, they figure out how they're going to create time to solve problems with their students.
Mhm.
They start to appreciate the utter futility of existing systems, and they are empowered to create change.
Mhm.
What CPS brings to that change are certain lenses, an assessment instrument that should be standard for any student who is struggling at whatever tier,
Mhm.
and a problem-solving process. What did I miss?
Um, there were so many questions. I
They
think
were they were amazing
there were
questions.
amazing questions. Yeah. I'm curious, how have you seen the folks who've adopted the model navigate resistance, whether that's peer-to-peer, whether it's hierarchical, whether that's families that maybe are like, are you sure this is going to be effective? What are some of the ways that folks respond to that resistance?
Well, it is an evidence-based model, so we can always point to that for the skeptical, but
Hmm.
not everybody really cares that something is evidence-based. So that may not be what's best,
Hmm.
right? But um, my quick response to that is get curious.
Hmm.
In the same way that we're getting curious with kids about things that they're struggling with, expectations they're having difficulty meeting,
Hmm.
we owe the exact same favor to adults who are struggling to adopt new ideas and bring them into practice, right? That's why all the questions that are being asked are absolutely fantastic and spot on, right? I don't view that as resistance. I view that as curiosity. And we have to get curious with adults about what's making it hard for them to move
Hmm.
in this direction. Because, as in the case of kids, if we don't know what's getting in their way, we're not going to be able to meet them where they're at.
Hmm.
And if we don't know what's getting in the way for an adult who just didn't come right on board because, this sounded like a great idea, they have legitimate concerns, they have skepticism, good for them, right?
Hmm.
We need to hear them out, meet them where they're at, see if we can help them come along.
If it's good for the kids, it's good for the grown-ups.
Let there be no doubt.
All
By
right.
the way, the educator from Georgia I was talking about earlier
Yeah,
acknowledged today that s- schools tend to be pretty top-down
they do.
ecosystems.
Mhm.
One of the things we see change in schools when they start doing this with kids
Mhm.
is that the adults want some too. And I view that as a very healthy development.
Mhm. Something that I often experience with educators is that they are a hands-on, um, energetic group of people who really want to start thinking tactically. So I
Mm.
would love to lean into that and create some space to talk tactics. When you think about a school district the size of Seattle Public Schools that is brand new to CPS, um, are there other examples from your experience that you could speak to about what implementation has looked like or could look like?
Yes. And within these parameters, there's options.
Hmm.
So here's the general parameters, but I'll also talk a teeny bit about some of the options, right?
Hmm. Great.
We need to orient people to this.
Hmm.
I think it's probably safe to say that most educators in these Seattle public schools still don't know about this and may not even have heard about it.
Hmm.
Step one, let's get them oriented, right? And we are happy to, we don't want to do this without people from Seattle Public Schools helping us figure out what the best way to do this is. Once
Mhm.
again, my allergy to pretending that Seattle Public Schools is the same as Chicago Public Schools, right?
Right.
It's not.
Mhm.
Um, what does Seattle need as a basic orientation to the model that is available to everybody?
Mhm.
In the case of individual schools, sometimes we recommend a book study. But if we're trying to help Seattle Public Schools do this, I'm very interested in consulting with, after this evening is over,
Mhm.
whoever's interested, helping us think about what's the best way to put this in front of any educator in Seattle Public Schools who wants to access it,
Mhm.
right? So that's sort of step number one, so that people have a basic orientation to the model. Step number two, generally speaking, and I envision that being video,
Mhm.
um, but it could be a book study, but I envision it being video that is created specifically for Seattle Public Schools,
Mhm.
that takes into account the ecosystem of Seattle Public Schools, right? And it
Mhm.
could be brief. Getting the right lenses on about this model is a 60 to 90-minute process.
Mhm.
Then comes the, all right, what schools want to jump in?
Mhm.
What do they need?
Mhm.
What one of the things Lives in the Balance offers is we get 5 or 6 people from a school and we do an early adopter training.
Mhm.
It's 5 or 6 people in a building getting their feet wet, with some practice and feedback of the two key components of the CPS model, the ASIP and Plan B,
Mhm.
the problem solving process. And then we're seeing where they're at after that, because the next step, once we have some early adopters trained, is to get a few people really good at it in a building,
Mhm.
and then to have those people be central to spreading it throughout a building.
Mhm.
Those are the general parameters. Those general parameters apply to general ed schools, they apply to special ed schools, they apply to special ed programs in general ed schools. The nuances are in the specific type of setting and what
Mhm.
that should look like, and
Yeah.
what the setting decides they want. What we typically try to do for each setting is establish some benchmarks.
Mhm.
What do we want? Without benchmarks, we're sunk,
Right.
right? What do we want to accomplish in the next 3 months, and how are we going to get there?
Mhm.
What do we want to accomplish in the 3 months after that? And what do we want to accomplish in the 3 months after that? What is our game plan?
Mhm.
And Angela's asking that, how did that process start? It starts with helping everybody get a general orientation to the model.
Mhm.
Otherwise, people don't know what we're talking about.
Right.
People can't embrace it or reject it because they
Mhm.
don't even know about it yet.
Right.
We've got to have some mechanism, and boy, would I sink my teeth into this, for helping everybody in Saddle Public Schools learn
Mhm.
about this in an hour to an hour and a half.
Right.
Then we find out who wants to keep going and what they need.
Mhm. I think that that not just who wants to keep going, but what do they need question is going to be particularly essential because Seattle Public Schools, like many districts of its size, deals with a fair number of equity issues. We've got some schools that have abundant resources. We've got some schools that are really struggling to get adequate resources. And I imagine that there would be a concern that if we take kind of an early adopter approach, we might widen that gap
Mm.
between well-resourced schools and under-resourced schools. And so I'm curious if you've seen examples of how folks have addressed that issue.
Well, the key to that, addressing that issue, is intentionality. We have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
And to the degree that I'm in the know, I would make sure that that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes I'm not as in the know as I would like to be.
Yeah.
But on the equity front, um, this is what every kid needs.
Hmm.
Um, and if we're doing this with everybody, then we are meeting every kid where they're at. If we recognize that because of developmental variability, and I talked about this last time,
Hmm.
some kids are going to have more expectations than others that they're having difficulty meeting.
Hmm.
and that good disproportionality means disproportionate problem solving.
Hmm.
What could be better, right? And boy, do I like that better than bad disproportionality,
Yes.
which is the disproportionate application of detention, suspension, expulsion, restraint, seclusion,
Hmm.
all things punitive.
Hmm.
So I actually feel that this is a fantastic way to deal with inequity
Hmm.
if we are recognizing that every kid needs this, some more than others.
Hmm.
We need to make sure that this information gets into the hand of every school in the SPS system.
Right.
Um, I think we can do that.
I think so too. We actually had a slide, or I think just one, I was going to say a slide or two prepared to think about implementation and how, if we're going to meet Seattle kids where they are, then we need to meet Seattle schools where they are.
Ah,
And so I know that after this conversation, actually not even after, right now in this conversation, a lot of folks feel ready to dive right in and talk about how to create the energy, the commitment, the political will to implement CPS. And there could be a variety of options about where to start with that. Others might be more in the realm of still awareness raising, whether that's at the school level or district wide. And there's options for you all as well, but ways that we can support you. But at this stage of the conversation, we definitely want to hear from you all about where you are, what kind of thoughts are bubbling around in your mind. So please look for an email soon from the Kids Do Well If They Can team. It's going to have links to this recording, links to the transcript of this conversation, a survey where you can share your ideas about what should come next and how you'd like to be involved. And I'd just like to take our last few minutes to ask you two more questions, Dr. Greene, if you'll
that
indulge me.
I'm happy to indulge you.
I appreciate that. So I think you've answered this already, but I'll ask it another way just in case that sparks a different thought. What do you think is the most important first step for schools or districts that say they're serious about this? They're ready.
There's a lot of different first steps. I would say that the most important first step is to say to ourselves, what we're doing right now for some of the kids in our building isn't working.
Hmm.
Are we good with an 80% success rate? We good with 70? Are we okay missing out on 10 to 20 to 30% of the kids in our building?
Hmm.
Um, let's learn a little bit about this. And once again, those are resources. Everything that was on that slide are things that we can come together to create.
Hmm.
I don't want to do it myself. I don't live in Seattle. I don't have as good a sense of the Seattle public schools ecosystem.
Hmm.
I'm happy to facilitate. I'm happy to create, but I
Hmm.
ain't doing it by myself because I can't. That's the bottom line, right?
Hmm.
And Lives in the Balance can't. We need people in Seattle helping us out. But if it's materials that are aimed at helping create awareness, we can do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Great.
Who should the 5 people in the building be? I saw that question. Whoever's available. We're not picky.
Hmm.
Whoever's ready to sink their teeth in. We're not picky about role. Uh,
Hmm.
you get the idea. Um, come together as a faculty, agree that there's a lot. This is not hard, right?
Hmm.
Agree. This is this is guaranteed. We got kids in our building who we are not reaching, who we are not helping, and
Hmm.
we keep doing the same thing to them over and over again. Let's get off that highway. Let's take the next exit
Hmm.
and let's start to explore what our possibilities are. Because what we're doing now and what we've been doing for the last 30 years isn't serving those students well and hasn't been serving those students well for a very long time.
Hmm.
Doesn't have to be that way. Let's just not accept it. That's a great discussion for a school staff to have. We're not getting into the weeds yet. We're not saying, does that mean there's no consequences? We're not there yet, right?
Hmm.
Let's start by agreeing we have kids in our building who we are not reaching, who we continue to disproportionately apply punitive exclusionary discipline to.
Hmm.
Let's ask ourselves what percentage we're okay with. The
Hmm.
number should be 100. What do we do for the kids for whom our current structures and practices are not working?
Mhm.
Because the only other option is to keep doing what isn't working, and that's not an okay answer.
All right, last question. What makes you optimistic?
I am optimistic by nature.
Me too.
Why not? I've
It's
seen
an
this
act of
work.
resistance, I find.
I've seen this work in so many schools.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess what makes me optimistic is I guess we could get worse than we are now.
Mhm.
But why don't we use now as our baseline for the worst it can be
Mhm.
and have the mentality that there's nowhere to go but up? Things are pretty bad right now for a lot of kids and for a
Yeah.
lot of educators.
Yeah.
That should spur change.
Mhm.
Let's not lose our bearings. We do not have to accept misery to the degree that we're seeing it
Mhm.
in our schools. That's
Yeah.
our domain. Um, the Senate might not be our domain.
Mhm.
World affairs might not be our domain. Your school is your domain. Do something about it.
Mhm. Miriam Kaba says hope is a discipline. Really appreciate that. All right, well, I think it is time for us to wrap up. Thank you so much, Dr. Greene. I always come away from our conversations just feeling inspired and excited and like learn new things. It's just nothing but good stuff. And I hope that that sentiment is widespread throughout all the folks who've been here this evening. This was definitely a juicy conversation, and that's my favorite kind. For you folks who've been here with us tonight, like we're all coming to this from different spaces and we're going to be moving forward in different ways. Some of us might be in a, like, I'm going to try this tomorrow headspace. Some of us might be in, I need to talk to my school team about this. Some of us might be sitting still with questions and maybe tension or friction. All of that is welcome. You are welcome exactly as you are where you are. I want to thank Dr. Greene again. I want to thank our wonderful interpreters, Karen and Heidi. Thank you so much for making this event accessible tonight. I want to thank the army of volunteers who made tonight possible. I'm so excited about this gathering of educators, families, support staff, leaders, advocates, and the synergy that we can create together. I hope that you left with more questions than answers because those questions are going to lead us to the future that our babies deserve. And I'm excited to be part of it with you. So thank you so much for your thoughts and your time. And I hope you have a great night.
So long, everybody.